And so there was context, a political culture here in this grand old industrial city for changing the reality that workers worked in, that the economy operated in. So I feel like I came here at a very perfect time. And I got a call from Jeanette Watkins, who I did not know, but she turned out to be a person who ran Buffalo Labor Studies. It was a Cornell ILR program that ran for 2 years for rank and file workers who were working to take classes at night, college credit classes at night, and learn labor history, collective bargaining, arbitration, occupational safety and health, communications, and anything that a union person might want to know to advance on the job and in their union and help solve the problems that they encountered in their everyday life. These folks who came together every Wednesday night over at Buff State and from all walks of life, teachers and electricians and bus drivers and auto workers and steel workers and machinists and carpenters, in classes where there was a fair amount of academic rigor because they were getting credit for it, but also there was a direct tie to what they needed to do in the workplace. And so a further connection with Cornell ILR and WNYCOSH is that Jermaine Herndon came to ILR labor studies as a student, and her creativity and inspiration has been a vital part of WNYCOSH ever since. The national context of environmental movement, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, and women's movement was in this period of 1970. So it was a wonderful time in this creative process. And it rested on the sort of solidarity culture that existed in Buffalo because of its high unionization and its history. And so WNYCOSH is truly an organic creation out of this context. And Lee had such an amazing capacity to continue to bring people together, to organize, to understand the big picture, and create an organization, part of a national organization, part of a state organization, but one that was collaborative with all. And then his political instincts were amazing as well, followed of course by Roger Cook. There are few better political strategists than Roger Cook, who combines that sort of pragmatism with a global idealism that powers it. So WNYCOSH has been a part of what I like to think of as Buffalo's progressive civic infrastructure since its beginning. And it's very hard to, replicate, to even quantify or understand the importance of something that you might call civic infrastructure, but it is what makes progress possible. One of the most important problems was the hazards in which many people worked in an industrial community like this. It's even today, I think it's a little bit hard to understand how dangerous the workplaces were, physically dangerous, and then also just the extent of chemical exposure and other things that were hidden and aren't just like breaking your back. And so WNYCOSH has had such an important influence in working with community organizations and with ILR in helping people understand that and change it. And the strength of this leadership comes from the fact that there is rank and file, there is grassroots organizing, there are people committed day to day to day to making the workplace better. And that's what WNYCOSH exemplifies. That's why it is so promising to think about the challenges we still face.
So CEJ came about as a result of WNYCOSH, along with the Labor Studies program at Cornell, Norm Harper and UAW Local 2100, which represented the workers at WNYCOSH, and a strong group of socially responsible religious leadership who came together, prompted by the announcement that TRICO was going to close 2 of its 3 manufacturing plants here in Buffalo, lay off 1,400 workers, and open 2 plants, one on the Texas border and one in Mexico. And then they were going to shift production down to the Mexico plant. Well, this came at right after Bethlehem Steel had closed, Republic Steel had closed. This was in the era of deindustrialization, when cities like ours were facing high unemployment rates. And so there was a community outcry. We had a combination of engaged religious ministers, of labor, of university professionals, and community activists, all wanting to find ways to work to reverse this announcement by TRICO Corporation. The problem that TRICO was facing was that it was losing money. It was losing money primarily because of bad management and CEJ, the Coalition of Economic Justice, began as a coalition of religious, union, community, academic, and labor leaders. We called ourselves Crucial. It's the initial spelled Crucial, and it was referred to as Crucial. The name was changed after about 5 years for obvious reasons, and it became the Coalition for Economic Justice. But at its founding, it was identified as a coalition of labor, religion, university, academic, and community leaders, which is really what it was. It was the citizens, the voice of the citizens of the community, defending community living standards and really asserting our interest in maintaining productive employment in Buffalo, New York, and industry in Buffalo, New York, so that a plant closing was not simply an issue of management making a decision about how to run its enterprise. It had impacts on all of us, and we had a shared and common interest in being able to preserve TRICO as a viable operation.
I believe that it would benefit the country as a whole because no one would be without health insurance. I believe in the early 90s, when we were doing this work with WNYCOSH, there were about 43 million Americans that were uninsured or underinsured, and people were going bankrupt trying to provide medical care in emergency situations for their family. People would ration their own care. So, well, I have an ache here and it's not worth going to the doctors because if something serious happens, then I need the money for that. And again, we were spending incredible amounts of money on healthcare, and we just weren't seeing the results. And that could be measured by looking at infant mortality rates and things like that. So we've just felt a healthier America would result from universal health care. For our members, it just seemed simple that if we could take health care off the bargaining table, then we would have the real room we needed to negotiate fair wages and other benefits like retirement for the people that worked in our hospitals, our factories, and out in the public providing services. That I first became involved with WNYCOSH in the mid-1980s when we were on strike at DeGraff Hospital. And all I knew at the time was that they were incredibly supportive of the workers in that facility. And that's really how I got to know Roger Cook and Jermaine Harden. Once the strike was over and we started or continued our conversations about social justice issues and workers' rights, healthcare just always came to the top of the list. And Roger and Jermaine were both passionate advocates for healthcare reform. And not only did they feel strongly about it, but they were always willing to do the work that was required to make an issue for a couple of people a campaign issue, to turn it from something we talked about into a campaign. And the work they did with, or we did with them around healthcare reform was absolutely amazing. From parades and floats and puppets and news conferences and protests. It was a full court press to bring to the attention of the public why healthcare reform was so important to this in this country.
And Newt Gingrich comes to power as the speaker, and he has a program called Contract for America. We call it Contract on America. So one of the things that had happened here in Western New York was that there was a woman named Julia Barbarich whose brother had been killed in a warehouse accident at Tops. And she came to us and asked if there was anything we could do. And I asked her, who's your congressperson? And she said, Bill Paxton from Amherst, in that area, Clarence Amherst. So I said, why don't we go have a visit with him? She was upset because at that time OSHA was under Gingrich was cutting back on the enforcement and so forth and so on. And the person who was leading that charge was Cass Ballinger from North Carolina. He put in what we call the OSHA Reform Bill, which would have stripped OSHA of most of its enforcement powers, its standard-setting powers, and so forth. It was targeted by the Gingrich administration as part of the Contract for America. So anyway, so I said, Julia, why don't we go meet with your congressman? And she said, I voted for him. And I said, great, that's even better. So we sat down. She told the story of how Tops was given a slap on the wrist, less than a $20,000 fine for the death of her brother, who was killed when a lift truck fell down on him because the chain broke. And so she was just angry that there was no real protection for her brother, no real penalty. And so we sat down with Paxton, and Paxton listened, and he got tears in his eyes. He actually heard her story and got tears in his eyes. And we asked him, would you, Congressman, one, not only come out against the Ballinger bill, but would you also come out for what we call the OSHA Reform Bill, which was being supported by the AFL-CIO. And Paxton said he'll look into it. We never heard back from him. Julia asked for another meeting. We never got another meeting. So what we did is we began to get people out to Paxton's office in Williamsville, and we picketed against both Paxton and Ballinger. We carried a wanted poster. We often had up to 100 people at the rallies, and we would get the press there. So part of the fight back then against the Ballinger bill and against Paxson was to basically get Paxson to get Gingrich and Paxson to back off, and Ballinger to back off on the bill. We had rallies out at the UAW 774 Hall. We brought in the health and safety director for the AFL-CIO nationally. We had big rallies and a number of rallies again at Paxson's office. We ultimately won that. The Ballinger bill was defeated. It didn't go anywhere. And as a consequence, shortly thereafter, Gingrich resigned because he was in trouble with his own party. And then Paxson subsequently resigned as well. So it was I think we played a big role out here in Western New York in fighting for OSHA rights and fighting against a bill that would have gutted OSHA, basically.
Over a little Pyrex loaf pan filled with the solvent. And methylene chloride is a material that the body metabolizes in the liver and breaks it down and forms carbon monoxide, and that's where carbon monoxide poisoning came from. So it was really a case of just moving her to a back portion of the plant where there was an old lab hood that no one was using, and we could just get her working at the lab hood, and that solved that problem.
I got involved with WNYCOSH through the WNSAP program when I was in high school, so early 2000s, around that time. I got involved in WNSAP because I really wanted to do something that would make a difference in my community, and the issue really touched me through learning about the effects on families and children and how fair labor can really impact the world and make it a better place. So one of the main things that we would work on through the WNSAP program is to organize meetings in our school where we worked together to organize an outreach to encourage our school to pass what was called the Sweat-Free Schools Initiative. We were trying to encourage our school through this initiative to purchase products from ethically sourced companies. And we also did a great deal of organizing and education about labor issues from companies such as Disney, who are really popular, and we wanted to educate others on labor issues around the world. Part of my experience working with WNSAP was that we went to Mexico and we were in the border region, and we met with workers and their families, and we learned all about their stories and their experiences of how different labor rights issues around the world affected their daily lives. And that was a really huge takeaway from this program, and it really helped put a human face on these kind of abstract global issues. And we really learned about how it was affecting people our age or just a little bit older, and made that experience very real and tangible in a way that we were motivated to then go out into our communities and educate and organize others. So as part of the Sweat-Free Schools initiative that we worked on our high school campus, we organized a march called the March of 100 Elves through our local community to encourage our school district to pass the Sweat-Free Schools initiative, to encourage our school to buy products from ethical companies. And in the process of this, we organized this rally through the downtown district of our town, and we had quite a good turnout, and we were all pushing for our district to pass this labor rights initiative. I think that one of the biggest things that I took away was just in the process of learning how to organize in our community, we learned all of these different skills that we could then take and use to, implement other things in our communities. So while it was seemingly like something on one issue, it kind of could expand. Like when even as like a business owner too, like I do that, like learning how to organize things, contacting media, all of those things like help to allow you to become an agent of change in your community.
Worker Center is a very critical expansion of the idea of how we achieve workers' rights for everyone. Because in Buffalo, the unionized sector has declined as it has elsewhere, and the needs for achieving workers' rights for refugee communities and other people in low-wage work is a continuing struggle. The Worker Center does amazing on-the-ground work to make sure that those kind of workers have access to language-appropriate information and are empowered to represent themselves and advocate for themselves for the rights that already exist and for new rights that we should be thinking of for workers. Because another part of the change in the economy in Buffalo is that, as elsewhere in the United States, is that workers' power and workers' rights have eroded over time. So this is a new effort that makes a very big difference to people on the job. Because we know that immigrant and refugees have been a very creative part of this economy forever. They work in all different kinds of occupations. Their rights are important to the whole economy and to them, and the Worker Center promises a great deal of difference in how they experience their opportunity.
Somewhere around 1997, I met Roger Cook at a safety roundtable. And so long story short, after that, Roger introduced me to many, many brilliant people, Roger being one of them. And Janet Foley was one, and we started Barb Stanley from the Department of Labor. And we started talking about how can we put this together to really make an impact. And Roger, with his hard work on legislative end of this program, started to really pull together this task force. So it was a group of, as you know, the New York State Zero Lift Task Force was a group of unions and Kaleida Health. I think our journey in the legislative end was this New York State Task Force just rolling up their sleeves and working very hard to do education and outreach. Roger and Jermaine worked very hard to get grants and funding to put these programs in other healthcare settings. And so as we were working on the legislation, we were also working on helping facilities get their programs together. The funding and the training and the hard work was across New York State. So we were it was not just Western New York. At that time, then we moved into really pushing it across the whole state. I think that the work that WNYCOSH did in developing the manual and the training programs and their collaboration with Cornell, it was just like a ball rolling. We just kept going and building momentum, and our goal to get toward legislation at times seemed like it would never happen. And Roger kept us on task, and we did get to the legislation in 2014. And I think that one of the most important things about that legislation was it was built and based on the goals and the accomplishments that WNYCOSH had. So we were able to help script what those guidelines would look like, what the law would look like. And I think that today, if you look at what we were able to accomplish, it is a safety benchmark for any healthcare worker. And to have a safe patient handling program that includes all the components that we would like to see facilities follow is a script for a perfect match between labor and management, patient safety, and employee